My name's Madison. I'm 28 years old, sitting alone on a secondhand love seat in a cramped studio with a flickering overhead bulb and a cracked window frame that barely blocks the wind. And still, the coldest part of this room is the emptiness. I feel when I remember everything I gave, and how none of it mattered. There comes a point in some people's lives when they stop asking for applause, approval, or even acknowledgement. I hit that moment 2 years ago, the day I watched my father lift a glass in honor of someone else, for the sacrifices I made that I wasn't always invisible. As a child in Columbus, Ohio, I believed loyalty would earn love. That effort would balance the scales. That responsibility was its own kind of praise. But in my house, praise had a different name. Sienna. 3 years younger and effortlessly adored, Sienna was born with blonde hair that caught sunlight like strands of golden eyes that reminded everyone of summer skies. She didn't walk into rooms, she floated. Teachers melted. Neighbors grinned. Family members practically orbited around her like she was gravity itself, and then there was me. The dependable one. I color-coded calendars, washed socks without being asked, restocked the fridge, and organized carpool schedules. No one ever gasped over my science fair trophies or asked for another peek at my report cards. I was the backstage crew to Sienna's center spotlight. Growing up, the pattern was subtle, but it deepened with every passing year. Every August before school, Sienna would be paraded through department stores for new shoes, glittering backpacks, and 3 fresh outfits per week. I'd be handed a single shirt and reminded that last year's jeans just needed a belt. When she wanted to enroll in dance classes at the city's most prestigious studio, our parents cleared the calendar and signed the checks without blinking. They never missed a recital. My request to join the academic decathlon team, which cost only $25, was met with a frown and a speech about budgeting. There was one moment that never left me, the piano conversation. Both Sienna and I begged for lessons. We even pooled our birthday cash to help cover the cost. One evening, our parents sat us down on the worn floral couch in our living room. I was so sure they'd say we'd take turns, or at least both get a chance. Instead, my father turned toward my sister and said, "Sweetheart, your voice in the shower is a gift. This is clearly your calling. Madison, you're better suited for practical skills." That was the first time I felt something shift. But I smiled anyway. Because that's what I'd been trained to do. Clap for Sienna. Swallow every sting. By high school, Sienna was the leading actress in the drama club, homecoming royalty, and voted most inspirational without submitting a single quote. Our parents drove hours to see her on stage. Meanwhile, I quietly maintained a 4.2 GPA, balanced a job bagging groceries, and mapped out scholarships. When I was inducted into the National Honor Society, they couldn't come. Sienna had dress rehearsal. The gap wasn't just emotional, it was financial, too. When she got accepted to a private art college with a yearly price tag of nearly $50,000, champagne corks popped. No one mentioned loans. No one asked if she'd contribute. They just assumed they'd make it happen. When I brought up my acceptance into a state university, I was patted on the back and handed a stack of financial aid forms, but I didn't give up. I worked. I graduated. I walked the stage alone. I started from nothing, moved into a tiny unit with a Murphy bed that creaked, and paid $650 a month just to be able to say I stood on my own. And still, even after all that, when my parents' bills began to pile up, I gave. Quietly. It started small. I noticed overdue notices shoved into drawers when I visited. I overheard my dad arguing with the electric company. I saw my mom holding back tears while clipping coupons at the dining table. So I began transferring money, $200 at first. Then more. I timed it mid-month, around the 15th, when I knew things got tight. I never signed the deposits. I just wanted to help. When they asked, I told them it might be Sienna doing something nice. They didn't even question it. "She's so thoughtful," Mom beamed. "She's really maturing," Dad added proudly. They told the entire extended family how selfless Sienna had become. The girl who hadn't worked a single job, who spent her days painting portraits of birds and clouds, had become the quiet provider, and I let them believe it, not because I enjoyed being erased, but because I was scared that the moment I took credit, it would somehow make the gesture feel ugly, like I'd only done it for the applause. I convinced myself that love meant giving without needing. That maybe, one day, they'd realize the truth, but the more I gave, the more I disappeared. At first, the transfer was $200. Then $500. Then $1,000. Then more. Eventually, I was funneling $5,000 every single month. I gave up nights out. Cancelled my gym. Switched to canned beans and thrift store basics. My boyfriend James saw the toll before I did. "You're vanishing," he told me one night as I nodded off mid-conversation. "You're fading away, Madison." But I couldn't stop. Even as Sienna got credit for everything, even as my parents praised her intuition and generosity. I kept going until my father stood in the backyard during Sienna's birthday party, pointed to a gift I had given with my last $60, and mocked me in front of 30 people. "You only gave her 60 cents? While your sister sends us $5,000 every month?" I stood there, holding a paper plate with store-brand potato salad and listening to relatives whisper about my selfishness, and then, something snapped. The paper plate trembled slightly in my grip as my father's words sliced through the air, like a blade sharpened on years of ignorance. A hush fell over the backyard, even the kids near the swing set froze mid-laugh. My hand reflexively tightened around the flimsy plastic fork as my chest constricted. "Your sister has been holding this family together," he continued proudly. "Month after month, without ever asking for recognition." I looked around at the assembled faces, cousins clutching red plastic cups, aunts biting their lips, uncles leaning in to catch every word. No one looked at me with curiosity. Only judgment. As if I were the parasite. The burden. A flush of heat surged up my neck. My ears rang. That money, the thousands of dollars I had quietly transferred every month, had come from me. Not Sienna. Not the family's beloved artistic muse. Me, the daughter they barely remembered during birthdays. The one who had stopped buying coffee to afford their medication. The one eating instant noodles 5 nights a week while Sienna bragged about imported brushes and specialty canvas from Milan. I hadn't planned to say anything. I came with nothing but humility and a discount picture frame. But the humiliation cracked something inside me. A part of me that had long believed silence was strength. "That was me," I said, barely above a whisper. No one reacted. I wasn't sure they even heard me. "I'm the one who's been sending the money," I repeated louder. "For 3 years. Now they heard. A confused murmur rippled through the group. Some heads turned. Others narrowed their eyes, uncertain whether to laugh or gasp. My father frowned. "What are you talking about?" "The $5,000, I clarified. "Each month. That wasn't from Sienna. That was from me. I've been covering the mortgage. The bills. Groceries. All of it." My mother's expression curdled instantly. Her lips thinned into a rigid line, her brows dropped, and a sharp hiss escaped her throat. "Stop lying," she snapped. "This is Sienna's moment. Don't ruin her celebration just because you feel left out." I blinked. The accusation wasn't just painful, it was surreal. I had given nearly everything I owned, sacrificed comfort, time, and health, only to be labeled an attention seeker in front of my entire bloodline. "I can prove it," I said, pulling my phone from my purse with trembling hands. "I have bank records. The account number matches mine. You can check the routing details." "We don't need fake receipts," Dad interjected coldly. "We know who's helped us and who's spent their life keeping score." That last sentence, the suggestion that my desire to be acknowledged was petty, hit harder than anything else. The circle of guests around us remained frozen. Conversations had evaporated. Even the radio playing classic rock in the background had faded into irrelevance, and Sienna said nothing. She stood beside her mountain of wrapped boxes and high-end gifts, mouth slightly parted, eyes darting around, but she didn't speak. Not a word. She could have ended the entire confrontation with a sentence, but instead, she stayed silent. I turned toward her. "You knew." She didn't deny it. I shook my head and stepped back, heart pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. 3 years. 3 years I gave up everything so you could keep the lights on, and you let them believe it was you. No response. No apology. No explanation. Cousin Marie mumbled something to her husband. Aunt Carol placed a hand on her chest like she'd witnessed a car crash. Uncle Frank began collecting soda cans and napkins, pretending the world hadn't just cracked open. My father clapped his hands once. "Let's get back to the party." That was it. That was all. I turned and walked toward the gate, feeling 30 eyes burning into my back like spotlights in a darkened theater. No one stopped me. No one asked me to stay. I reached my car, closed the door, and sat in stunned silence as the sounds of laughter gradually resumed behind me. When I finally drove away, I didn't cry. I felt hollow. That night, I sat on my mattress with a bowl of plain rice and stared at the autodraft confirmation screen on my banking app. My finger hovered over the cancel button for a long time, then I clicked. Just like that, the $5,000 monthly lifeline my family depended on was gone. No more missed meals. No more declining social invites. No more sleeping in thrifted sweaters. Because I couldn't afford heating. I had given enough. For the first time in 3 years, I allowed my income to serve me. The relief was immediate. Unfamiliar. Borderline euphoric. I slept deeply that night, unburdened by guilt, unshackled from their silence. The following 2 weeks were quiet. Not a single phone call. Not a single text. I assumed they were still nursing the embarrassment of the party, clinging to the belief that I had ruined everything. Meanwhile, I bought fresh produce, new shoes, a clean coat without frayed seams, I took James out for dinner at a small bistro. His smile when I ordered without scanning the prices made my heart ache in the best way. You look lighter, he told me. I feel lighter. But the silence didn't last. Tuesday evening, just after I'd finished folding laundry, my phone began to buzz. First it was Mom. Then Dad. Then Sienna. Then Mom again. Dad, I didn't answer, not because I was angry, but because I wasn't ready to be guilt back into invisibility. The voicemails told me everything I needed to know. Mom's voice, anxious. Madison, sweetheart, call me. Something's going on. Dad's message was more direct. Call your mother. The bank account's messed up. Sienna's tone was different. Unsteady. They're panicking. I told them. I never sent anything. They just assumed. And suddenly, everything I'd kept hidden came pouring into the light. The next morning, my phone rang again just past 8 a.m., long before I'd planned to get up. The screen flashed. Dad. I hesitated. My thumb hovered above the decline button, but something deep inside told me I needed to hear this, not for him, but for me. I answered. His voice on the other end was stripped of bravado. No indignation, no sarcasm, no father knows best arrogance. Only confusion and a quiet desperation I'd never heard from him before. Madison, he said slowly. We need to talk. I waited. He cleared his throat. The bank showed us the account number. The one those payments were coming from. It's yours. The air in my apartment felt heavy, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. I didn't say anything right away. I just listened to the silence stretching between us like a bridge over icy water. Finally, I replied, yes. It's mine. It always was. There was a pause, then came the words I'd been waiting years to hear, but not the way I'd imagined them. I don't understand. Why didn't you tell us? I closed my eyes. It wasn't that I hadn't practiced this conversation in my head. I had, over and over again, during late-night subway rides, while folding laundry, even brushing my teeth. But when the moment came, the truth felt so dense it barely fit into words, because I thought one day it would be obvious. That the effort would speak for itself. That you'd see me. Without me needing to shout for it. He exhaled. We thought it was Sienna. She said. She didn't say anything, I interrupted. She just let you assume. And when I finally said something, you treated me like a liar. A thief. At her party. In front of everyone. A long stretch of quiet filled the line. I could hear him breathing, uneven and tentative. Eventually, he murmured, I'm sorry for what I said. That was wrong. I didn't realize. I let him trail off, because apologies, when forced by facts, carry little weight. Dad, I said, not unkindly, I stopped the transfers. That wasn't revenge. That was survival. I've been scraping by while you applauded someone else for my sacrifices. There was a long beat of silence, then he said something that revealed exactly how deep the entitlement ran. But we need that money. Your mother had to take on more tutoring. I'm not back full-time. You know how much that support helped us. The words landed like a hammer, not because they surprised me, but because I had hoped, despite everything, that maybe this time he'd say something different. Maybe he'd say, thank you. Maybe, we had no idea how much you gave up for us. Instead, he asked me to resume the arrangement, like it was a bill I'd forgotten to pay. You expect me to start sending $5,000 again? I asked, incredulous. We can't afford to lose it right now, he replied flatly. I know emotions are high, but this is about survival. Your mom's exhausted. We're behind on the mortgage. Everything's falling apart. I blinked. There. It was, no remorse, no appreciation, just a demand cloaked in concern. I'm not doing this anymore, I said calmly. Not unless things change. What's that supposed to mean? I want public acknowledgement, I stated. Real credit for what I've done. Equal treatment, not lip service. And Sienna has to step up financially too. No more playing the starving artist while everyone else suffers. His response came fast and harsh. You're blackmailing your family with money? I let the words hang. If you really cared about us, he continued, you wouldn't be using our situation to get attention. My hands curled into fists. Attention? I echoed. I've lived in poverty for years while you clapped for someone else. This isn't about recognition for vanity. It's about being seen. Being respected. Being part of this family, not just a wallet with a heartbeat. But he wasn't listening anymore. I could feel it. The defensive armor had slammed back into place. The moment of vulnerability had vanished, replaced by wounded pride. The call ended without resolution. Over the next several days, the campaign began. Mom called me crying, whispering into the phone about overdue bills and medical expenses. We'll lose the house, Madison, she wept. Don't punish us for a misunderstanding. Sienna messaged me late one night, paragraph after paragraph, painting herself as a victim of miscommunication. We're supposed to give without expectations, she wrote. Family means loving through mistakes. I rolled my eyes so hard. I almost gave myself a headache. The manipulation spread further. Aunt Carol rang to express her concern, not about me, but about the stress I was causing my parents. "They're not eating well," she said, as if I hadn't spent 3 years skipping meals. "Maybe you could let it go?" Uncle Frank left a voicemail too. "This isn't like you, Maddie. I know you've got a good heart. Just do the right thing." Cousins I hadn't spoken to since middle school suddenly wanted to check in. All parroting the same script: family first. Don't keep score. Be generous. None of them asked why I stopped. None cared enough to understand the years leading up to this collapse. None were willing to confront the ugly truth that I had been used, not maliciously, perhaps, but consistently and completely. The hardest call came from Grandma. 83, sharp as ever, always the one person whose voice could both soothe and devastate me. She cried, not politely, genuinely. "You're better than this, Madison," she said through trembling breaths. "You were raised to love, not to hold grudges." "I'm not holding a grudge," I whispered. "You're punishing them." "No, Grandma. I'm protecting myself." She didn't understand, and that hurt more than anything else. I ended the call gently. Then I sat in the dark, wondering if I was being cruel. Wondering if maybe I'd become the villain in someone else's story while trying to reclaim mine. James came over later that evening. He didn't speak right away. Just handed me a cup of tea, sat beside me, and waited. Eventually, I told him everything: the exhaustion, the guilt, the tug-of-war between wanting to be appreciated and fearing I was being selfish. He listened. Then he said something I'll never forget: "You're not asking for praise. You're asking for equality. That's not selfish. That's human." James didn't push. He didn't offer instant fixes. He just stayed, which, at that moment, meant more than any advice ever could. "You're not punishing them," he said softly, resting a hand on mine. "You're drawing the first boundary they've ever been forced to see." His words settled deep. For so long, I had operated under the unspoken belief that love meant limitless giving. That the people closest to you were entitled to your sacrifice, even if they never acknowledged it. But something had changed. That night, for the first time in years, I didn't fall asleep with a tight knot in my stomach. I didn't dream about unpaid bills or family dinners where I faded into the wallpaper. I rested, truly rested, knowing that I had finally started choosing myself. But my family didn't take silence as surrender. Over the following weeks, the pressure intensified. It came in layers: texts, voicemails, indirect messages through relatives. Each one delivered a variation of the same theme: forgiveness, obligation, guilt. Yet none of them addressed the real wound: the years of erasure, the decades of second place. A mom left a sobbing message one night about Dad's back pain returning. "He's in agony, Madison," she cried. "We don't have the money for another physical therapy round. Please, please don't turn your back on us now." Dad followed with a more calculated plea. "I know things have been said, and maybe we didn't handle the situation perfectly. But the house won't hold if the support vanishes. We're not asking for forever, just until things stabilize." But I knew better. Stability wasn't the goal. Silence was. As long as I didn't ask for anything in return, as long as I kept my name off the credit list, everything was smooth. The moment I stood up? Chaos. Still, it hurt, even with James reminding me daily that my stance was justified. The emotional weight was immense. Each call felt like a thread yanking me backward. Each message chipped away at my resolve, but I stayed firm, and slowly, things began to shift. Without the regular cash flow, their lifestyle began to bend under the pressure. They stopped eating out. The groceries downgraded. The lights weren't always on during video calls. Background noises, once televisions or upbeat music, were replaced by silence. Real silence. The illusion was cracking, and the most unexpected fallout wasn't from my parents. It was Sienna. For the first time in her adult life, she was being asked to contribute. Not metaphorically. Not symbolically. Literally: rent, groceries, utilities, $800 a month. She called me one afternoon in a panic. "This is insane," she whined. "I can't work like this. It's soul-crushing." She had taken a graphic design job at a local studio. A salaried position. Benefits included. But the shock of having to clock in every morning, respond to emails, meet deadlines, it rattled her. "It's just so rigid," she complained. "I barely have time for my creative flow." I bit my tongue so hard I tasted copper. She had spent years lounging in privilege, funded by my scraped-together paychecks, and now she was allergic to accountability. Still, I said nothing cruel. Instead, I asked gently, "How are you managing?" "Barely," she moaned. "They expect so much. And on top of that, Mom and Dad keep hinting about bills. Like, shouldn't they be supporting me while I transition?" I let the silence stretch. Eventually, she muttered, "They said I need to step up." "That's what you told them, isn't it?" I didn't answer, because yes, it was, but hearing the resentment in her voice confirmed what I feared. She hadn't learned. Not yet. This wasn't about fairness to her, it was about losing comfort. The following week, Dad called again. Not to argue. Not to demand. But to bargain. "We're willing to make some concessions," he began, as if this were a corporate negotiation. "We won't talk about who sent what. But maybe you could resume at a lower rate? 2,000? I paused, stunned. "We still wouldn't mention it publicly," he added quickly, "but at least the money would help keep us afloat." So that was it. Even now, when they knew the truth, they were willing to accept financial support, but not the story attached to it. I declined calmly, but firmly. Then came Mom. Her tone had softened. "I've been thinking," she admitted. "About everything." Her message wasn't manipulative. It sounded reflective. Almost apologetic. She asked to meet. Said she wanted to talk, not argue. "Come for dinner Sunday," she said. "No tricks. No surprises. Just conversation." I didn't commit right away, but after a long talk with James, and a sleepless night full of what-ifs, I agreed. That Sunday, I drove to the house I used to send money to every month, the place I hadn't stepped foot in since the party. It felt different. Smaller. Quieter. More fragile. Inside, the atmosphere was cautious. Dad greeted me at the door with a nod. "No lecturas." No jokes. Just a nod. Sienna looked tired. She wore slacks, a wrinkled blouse, and dark circles under her eyes. For the first time, she didn't resemble a portrait in a gilded frame. She looked real. Dinner was subdued. Roast chicken, canned green beans, boxed mashed potatoes. A far cry from their usual lavish spreads. After dessert, Dad cleared his throat. "We need to say something," he began, looking directly at me. I braced, but what followed stunned me. "We owe you an apology," my father began, his voice low but steady. The clinking of forks and distant hum of the refrigerator were the only sounds in the room. Even Sienna had gone completely still. He wasn't reading from a card or reciting a prepared speech. These weren't rehearsed words. This was coming from somewhere real, maybe guilt, maybe clarity, maybe a mixture of both. "I was wrong," he continued. "We were wrong. About the money. About the way we treated you. Especially at that party." He paused, glanced at my mother, who gave a subtle nod. "You've carried more than we ever knew," she added. "You didn't just help us financially, you kept this family standing when it was falling apart." I swallowed hard, hearing those words after years of silence hit like a wave crashing over a seawall. Part of me wanted to fold into them, to believe they were enough. Another part remained cautious, conditioned by too many years of being sidelined. "We were proud of you," Mom said. "But we assumed your strength meant you didn't need attention. Or celebration." That was the part that cracked something in me, because they were right. I had been strong. But that didn't mean I hadn't needed support, too. That didn't mean I was immune to pain, or longing, or fatigue. Then Sienna spoke. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I knew it wasn't me," she said, looking down at her hands. "When they started thanking me, I didn't correct them. At first, it just felt nice to be appreciated for once." She looked up, tears welling in the corners of her eyes, and then it got too big. The stories. The praise. I didn't know how to admit it anymore. So I stayed quiet. "I'm sorry." The honesty in her words pierced deeper than any lie ever had, because now it was real. She had known. She had stood by while I was ridiculed, while relatives whispered behind napkins, while my own parents defended a fantasy, and she'd said nothing. Still, her apology, fragile and vulnerable, was something I never thought I'd hear. Then Dad turned to me again. "We want to make it right. Not just because we need help, but because we finally see what you've done. And who you are." Those words meant more than any apology, because for once, they weren't asking for anything. They were offering something. Truth, and truth changes things. The following week, they acted on that promise. They hosted a 4th of July cookout, a smaller event this time, just close relatives. No decorations, no big gestures. But just enough familiar faces to matter. Midway through the evening, my father clinked his glass to get everyone's attention. The chatter died down. Children looked up from their snacks. Plates paused midair. "I need to address something," he said. A few glances were exchanged. Whispers traveled across picnic tables. "3 months ago, I embarrassed Madison in front of many of you. I made a public assumption that was completely wrong, and hurtful." He inhaled sharply. "For 3 years, our family was kept afloat by someone who never asked for thanks, who never sought recognition. Madison was that person." Heads turned, mouths fell slightly open. I gave Sienna credit for her sacrifices. I was mistaken. And I want to say, in front of all of you, that I'm sorry. Silence, not awkward, reverent, then a few nods. Some muttered acknowledgements. A rare look of surprise from Uncle Frank. It wasn't theatrical. It didn't erase years of neglect. But it mattered. Afterward, my aunt approached quietly, eyes filled with something that resembled shame. "I'm sorry," she said. "I believed the wrong story." It was a simple sentence, but it carried weight. That gathering marked a turning point. It wasn't just the apology that changed things. It was the follow-through. Suddenly, my work was being acknowledged. My thoughts were invited during family conversations. My victories were celebrated with genuine enthusiasm, not obligatory nods. When I received a promotion at the agency, both parents called to ask details, not just title and salary, but what the role meant to me. They even hosted a small dinner in my honor. Nothing extravagant, just homemade lasagna and a cake with my name spelled correctly in frosting, but it was the effort that mattered. And Sienna? She changed, too. It wasn't instant. But slowly, a new dynamic took shape. She started asking for my advice, not because she needed permission, but because she wanted perspective. "I don't know how you did it," she said once after a rough day at the office. "The early mornings, the bills, the pressure. I used to think you just had it all figured out." I laughed softly. "I never had it figured out. I just didn't have a choice." She nodded. "Still, you did it anyway. That counts for something." More than she knew. With her finally contributing to the household budget, the weight no longer fell entirely on my shoulders. Dad's recovery had progressed to the point where he was picking up more hours. Mom's tutoring was steady. For the first time, the family was functioning like a team. That shift made it possible for me to consider helping again, not because I felt obligated, but because I wanted to. I met with them a week later and outlined a new plan. "I'm willing to send $2,000 monthly," I told them. "But I need to know it's going toward a shared future, not a one-sided burden." They agreed, this time, with gratitude, this time, with respect. No more anonymity. No more erasure. My name was finally in the narrative, where it always should have been. Something shifted inside me after that moment. I didn't just feel like a provider anymore, I finally felt like a daughter. The monthly assistance I resumed wasn't an act of quiet desperation but one of mindful generosity. I wasn't bleeding myself dry to prop up a system that dismissed me. I was choosing, intentionally, to contribute, without erasing myself in the process. $2,000 each month was still a significant sum. But it no longer came at the expense of my own well-being. This time, I kept my apartment, a modest yet clean space with enough sunlight to warm my mornings and enough dignity to make me feel human. I resumed small joys, Saturday brunches with James, trips to used bookstores, even the occasional takeout sushi roll I had once convinced myself was too indulgent, and every time I transferred funds, my phone would buzz shortly after with messages of appreciation. Mom would text photos of grocery receipts, Dad would forward utility confirmations, and Sienna would update me on how they divided household expenses. Transparency replaced assumption, gratitude replaced guilt. They even began inviting me into financial discussions, asking for my thoughts on budgeting, savings plans, and how to navigate insurance policies. For the first time, I wasn't being told what to do or silently relied upon. I was respected. Trusted. It was the relationship I had always wanted, not just with them, but with myself, and the changes didn't stop there. Sienna's full-time position, once treated like a creative prison sentence, began evolving into something she could embrace. She discovered ways to weave her artistry into commercial campaigns, injecting personality into client work that won her praise from her team. Her paycheck didn't just pay bills, it reshaped her worldview. We started meeting for coffee every other weekend. It was awkward at first, two sisters learning how to speak without a script, but slowly, conversations became easier. She started asking real questions. How did you handle the pressure when everything depended on you? What made you keep going when no one noticed? How did you forgive me? I didn't answer that one right away, because the truth is, forgiveness wasn't a single act. It was a daily decision. Some days, it came easily. Other days, I'd remember her silence while I was drowning and feel the old wounds flare. But watching her now, eyes tired but curious, posture slumped from effort instead of entitlement, I saw someone who was learning, and that was enough. The financial foundation at home stabilized further over the following months. Dad's workload gradually increased until he was back to full-time. His physical therapy paid off, and though he still moved carefully, he carried pride in every task. Mom narrowed her tutoring schedule, finally giving herself evenings off to read, cook, or simply breathe, and Sienna, perhaps the biggest surprise of all, asked me to help her set up a retirement account. "After all this," she said one afternoon as we sat in her living room surrounded by canvases and tax documents, "I want to build something for myself. I don't ever want to depend blindly again." That single sentence was worth more than any gift she could have handed me, because now, she understood. One evening, while sipping chamomile tea and scrolling through emails, I came across one from HR. Another promotion offer, this time to lead strategist. Better pay. Larger team. More travel. I accepted, without hesitation. When I told my parents, they threw another dinner. Smaller than Sienna's birthday party, but full of genuine joy. There was a banner that read, "Congratulations, Madison," in uneven hand-painted letters. Dad grilled chicken. Mom baked an apple crumble. Sienna brought wine. They even gave a toast, short but sincere, to the backbone of our family, Mom said, raising her glass. "Thank you for showing us what strength really looks like." That evening, I realized something profound. Validation tastes sweeter when you no longer depend on it to survive. My relationship with James blossomed during this time, too. With the weight of secret sacrifices gone, I became more present. More available. More myself. He noticed immediately. "You laugh more," he said during a beach weekend getaway. "And you've started planning for the future again. It's like you're finally breathing fully." I smiled, because he was right. I had spent years operating in survival mode, budgeting every cent, shrinking every dream, pushing joy aside for obligation, but now, with balance restored, I could dream again. James and I started discussing bigger things: joint accounts, home ownership, maybe even marriage. Conversations that once felt indulgent now felt possible, and none of it would have happened if I hadn't stopped trying to be everything to everyone. If I hadn't drawn the line. 6 months after the birthday explosion, my parents called a family meeting. It wasn't formal, just the four of us, gathered in the living room with mismatched mugs of coffee and old blankets across our laps. "We've decided," Dad said, "to take full ownership of our expenses starting next quarter." Mom nodded. "You've done more than enough. We're stable now. It's time for us to carry ourselves." The shock hit harder than I expected, not because I doubted they could, but because I hadn't realized just how long I'd been holding that responsibility. Even after reducing the payments. I looked at them, not as burdens, but as people who had grown, people who had listened, evolved, and accepted their own roles in the dysfunction. I didn't cry, but I did breathe out a weight I didn't know I'd still been carrying. From that moment on, our connection became something new. Not transactional. Not guilt-based. Just real. And when I visited for Sunday dinners, I no longer felt like a guest in someone else's narrative. I felt like an equal. I never imagined peace could feel so unfamiliar. The months that followed felt like a quiet miracle. No accusations. No guilt-ridden voicemails. No strained smiles hiding buried resentment. Just small, ordinary signs that things were finally working. Sienna, to her credit, didn't revert. She kept her job. She stuck to the budget. She contributed without reminders or complaints. And even though she still bought pastel scarves she didn't need and overpriced matcha lattes from the corner cafe, she now did it with her own paycheck, not mine. One evening, while we browsed a local bookstore, she picked up a hardcover graphic design manual and flipped through the pages like someone studying for an exam. "I never thought I'd like structure," she confessed, half laughing. "But I think maybe I needed it." There was no hint of sarcasm in her voice. Only reflection. A rare, quiet honesty I hadn't expected, and certainly hadn't dared hope for. "You've changed," I said, meaning it. Her expression softened. "You made me see how much I was avoiding. It wasn't about money anymore. It wasn't about fairness or keeping score. We were rebuilding a connection that had once been wrapped in comparison and favoritism, and this time, it was real." Meanwhile, I found myself breathing easier with each passing day. That year, I renewed my lease. Without dread. My studio apartment, once a symbol of sacrifice, had become a sanctuary. I added curtains, hung art I actually liked, even bought a small rug that served no purpose other than comfort. Little things I never would have allowed myself during those leaner years. My closet slowly refilled with pieces that fit, not just my body, but my confidence. Shoes without holes. Coats that kept out the wind. I even replaced my ancient laptop, something I'd put off for so long it felt like a luxury car purchase. The biggest shift, though, wasn't visible. It was internal. For the first time in nearly a decade, I stopped bracing for disappointment. I no longer approached family gatherings with knots in my stomach. I stopped preparing speeches in my head, stopped anticipating side comments, stopped expecting to be eclipsed. One Saturday afternoon, we had a backyard potluck at my parents' house. Nothing major, just grilled vegetables, folding chairs, and mismatched paper plates. At one point, Aunt Carol sat down beside me, balancing a deviled egg on a napkin. "I owe you an apology," she said. I turned to her, surprised. "At Sienna's party, I judged you. I thought you were just bitter. That you were jealous." She looked down, embarrassed. But I didn't know the full story. I never asked. It took everything in me not to cry right then and there. Instead, I just nodded, because that, right there, that was enough. Bit by bit, others followed. Uncle Frank pulled me aside during a grocery run. Cousin Marie sent me a long text one evening, full of reflection and remorse. Even Grandma, who had once scolded me between sobs, called just to talk. No agenda. No guilt. Just conversation. She didn't bring up the past. But her tone said everything. "You sound happier," she said gently. "I am," I replied. James noticed it too. Our relationship flourished in ways I hadn't realized were even possible before. Now that I wasn't carrying the weight of everyone else's survival, I had space for joy. For spontaneity. For love without exhaustion. We took a trip to the coast. Nothing fancy, just 4 days in a quiet rental with sea views and salty air. I laughed more in those 4 days than I had in the previous 4 years. We cooked together. Played cards. Watched the sun dip beneath the waterline without checking our phones. "You're glowing," James said on the last night, as we shared ice cream on the deck. "I think I'm finally living," I replied, and I meant it. For too long, I had measured my value by how little I asked for and how much I gave. Now, I was redefining worth, not as currency, but as presence. As peace. As the ability to take up space without apology. The irony of it all wasn't lost on me. The very boundary that once shattered my relationship with my family had become the foundation for its repair. Sienna's employment created understanding. Dad's acknowledgement rebuilt respect. Mom's consistency repaired trust. And through it all, I remained clear: love isn't proven by sacrifice alone, it's built on mutual recognition. One day, while sorting through old receipts for my budgeting app, I stumbled across a statement from 2 years ago. A record of a $5,000 transfer, one of dozens, labeled simply as family. I stared at it for a moment, not with bitterness, but with awe, because that was a different version of me. A version who had believed that staying silent was the only path to loyalty. That giving more would eventually be enough. I no longer pitied her, but I also no longer aspired to be her again. She had done what she could with what she knew, but I, the woman holding that paper now, had learned a better way, and I wasn't going back. By the time autumn arrived, the air outside wasn't the only thing that had cooled. The tension that once pulsed beneath every family interaction had finally eased into something resembling comfort. We were no longer skirting around truths or pretending wounds had never been inflicted. We were talking. We were laughing. We were choosing honesty over harmony, and strangely, that brought more peace than forced smiles ever had. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments when old habits peeked through, subtle preferences, lingering assumptions, quiet comparisons. But now, I felt equipped to handle them. To speak up without trembling. To correct gently but firmly. To remind the people I loved that I wasn't afraid to be visible anymore, and they listened. That was the difference. A mom, who used to breeze past my comments in favor of Sienna's latest art project, now asked for my opinion, and waited for it. Dad, once dismissive or aloof, sent texts after our conversations just to say thank you. Sometimes they were awkwardly worded. Sometimes they came hours later. But they arrived. Even Sienna, who once floated on a cloud of constant validation, had learned how to ground herself. She no longer expected applause for showing up, and instead, she started asking how she could contribute more. One day, she surprised me with a small bouquet of daisies wrapped in recycled newspaper. Nothing fancy. Just a soft, unexpected gesture. "These reminded me of the ones you used to draw in the margins of your notebooks," she said with a sheepish smile. I hadn't remembered that detail. But she noticed, and that meant everything. In the past, I would have doubted her motives. Questioned the timing. Looked for the strings. Now, I just accepted them, because people can grow. Even the ones who once hurt you the most. At work, things blossomed as well. My new role came with more responsibility, but also more freedom. I began mentoring junior staff, leading strategy meetings, and being invited into executive discussions where I was no longer the note-taker. I was the decision-maker. Recognition wasn't just coming from my family anymore. It was everywhere. My financial situation stabilized to a point where I no longer counted pennies before the first of each month. I began building an emergency fund, setting aside money for travel, even contributing to retirement, luxuries that once felt light years away. I also started investing in myself emotionally. Therapy, journaling, weekend hikes, intentional solitude. Things that replenished me rather than drained me. It's amazing what changes when you stop pouring everything into people who refuse to refill your cup. James and I talked more seriously about our future. He'd been my anchor through every storm, steady, patient, unwavering. "I want to build a life with you," he said over breakfast one morning, pouring coffee with one hand and brushing crumbs off his laptop with the other. "But only if you're building it for yourself too." I understood what he meant. He didn't want me to shrink to fit someone else's needs. He didn't want a partner who disappeared under the weight of obligation. He wanted me, whole, thriving, present. So I said yes, not to a proposal yet, but to the life we were both ready to create. I began researching housing options, not just for convenience, but for ownership. I wanted a place with character. sunlight, a corner for reading, and a kitchen big enough to make Sunday pancakes without bumping into every cabinet. I wasn't looking for escape anymore. I was building something, and in the process, I was healing something I didn't even know had fractured, my sense of identity, because for years, I thought being strong meant being silent, that love meant tolerating imbalance, that worth was measured by sacrifice, but now I knew better. True. Strength is setting boundaries without shame, love is reciprocal, and self-worth isn't a reward someone else hands you, it's a truth you choose to believe, even when no one else does. That realization didn't come overnight. It wasn't a switch flipped by one apology or one party. It came through many tiny moments, Mom asking for my favorite dish and actually making it, Dad sending a photo of Sienna's paycheck stub, proudly sharing how she covered the electric bill. That month, Sienna texting after a stressful day, "I don't know how you did this for years. You're incredible." Those moments, stitched together, became the fabric of something new, not restitution, but redemption. One evening, as I sat on the fire escape of my apartment watching city lights flicker across rooftops, I opened a notebook and wrote down a single sentence: I am not invisible anymore. Then I underlined it twice and closed the cover with a quiet smile. By the time the holidays rolled around, my world had taken on a new rhythm, calmer, more grounded, and mercifully free of the emotional whiplash that used to accompany every family interaction. The usual chaos that December brought, frantic shopping lists, awkward dinners, tightly rehearsed cheer, felt different this time. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. There was no pretending we hadn't been through something. No sweeping discomfort under festive rugs. The old patterns hadn't disappeared, but they no longer dictated every interaction. For the first time since I was a teenager, I was actually looking forward to Christmas Eve. That evening, our living room felt warmer, and not just because of the crackling fire or the mulled cider Mom kept refilling. There was a quiet sincerity to everything. Sienna wore a knit sweater she'd bought with her own money, not one gifted and assumed. Dad handed out stockings with care instead of his usual distracted muttering. Mom didn't hover with a camera waiting for staged reactions, she just sat beside me and held my hand. The most surprising moment came after dinner. Sienna stood, clearing her throat with a nervous little laugh, and held up a small envelope. "I wasn't sure how to do this," she said, glancing at me. "But it felt important." She handed it to me with trembling fingers. Inside was a handwritten note, the kind she never used to take time for. On the front, in her looping script, it read, "What I never said." I unfolded the page. It wasn't poetic. It wasn't polished. But it was raw and true. She acknowledged the silence. Her complicity. The way she soaked in praise that wasn't hers, and how easy it had been to let the story unfold without correction. "I saw you breaking," she wrote. "And I let it happen because it was easier than admitting I hadn't earned any of it. But you were never invisible. I just wasn't looking." I couldn't speak after reading it. I just hugged her tightly. No grand declarations. No need for a response, because some things are answered through presence, not words. That night, while brushing my teeth in the tiny bathroom that still echoed with old water pipes and faint neighbor chatter, I caught my own reflection and paused. I looked older than the girl who had once written scholarship essays at a wobbly kitchen table while her sister tried on prom dresses. But I also looked stronger, sharper, more defined. Time had carved away at the version of me who thought love had to be earned through quiet suffering. What remained was someone clear-eyed and whole. The new year brought with it fresh momentum. At work, I was invited to lead a company-wide initiative aimed at expanding community outreach. It was the kind of project I'd once have been passed over for, too assertive, too forward-facing, too visible. But now? I was encouraged. Champion. My boss even asked me to mentor 2 new hires. She said, "You have a way of making people feel seen." I nearly laughed at the irony. For years, I'd been begging for that same courtesy. Meanwhile, James and I began searching for a place to share, something modest, with character and light. Every Sunday became a tour day. We'd wander through bungalows, narrow townhomes, a few fixer-uppers with more personality than practicality. One afternoon, we found it, a charming duplex near the park, with creaky floorboards and a window seat that overlooked sycamore trees. The kitchen needed updating, the paint was chipped, but something about it felt right. "I can see us here," James said, grinning. So could I. We made an offer that week. Moving in wasn't glamorous. It involved borrowed trucks, mismatched boxes, and one dramatic moment when a bookshelf toppled over during assembly. But I'd never felt more proud, not just of the home, but of everything it symbolized. It wasn't built from obligation or survival. It was chosen, earned, lived in with intention. My parents came by one weekend to help unpack. They brought chili in a crockpot, old throw pillows from the attic, and a framed photo of the 4 of us taken at that July cookout, the one where Dad had first spoken the truth aloud. He handed it to me without comment, but the message was Clear. He saw me now, fully. That evening, while sipping cocoa by the window, Mom turned to me and said, "You've always been our compass, you know." I blinked, stunned. "I didn't see it before," she added. "But you've been steering this family for years." I didn't need the praise anymore. I wasn't starved for it the way I had been. But hearing it, after so much time in the shadows, was healing in ways I didn't know I still needed. And Sienna, she continued showing up, not in grand gestures, but in small consistencies. She called to ask about budgeting, she asked for help filing her taxes, she invited me to her first solo gallery exhibit, where her art hung under a handmade sign that read, "Dedicated to Madison, my truest teacher." I cried in the bathroom for 15 minutes after reading it, because growth is quiet like that. It doesn't always come with fireworks or drumrolls. Sometimes, it arrives in steady hands, in thoughtful notes, in the way someone looks at you like, "You finally matter." By spring, I no longer recognized the girl who once lived off canned soup and crossed her fingers every time she swiped her debit card. I no longer flinched when my phone rang with their names. I didn't tiptoe around my own needs, or pretend my boundaries were too demanding. I had built a life, one rooted in dignity, balance, and honesty, and every part of it had been worth the cost. Life no longer felt like a tightrope walk across invisible expectations. Instead, it resembled a wide, solid path, uneven at times, full of unpredictable turns, but mine to walk, without shame or second guessing. That spring, as magnolia trees bloomed along the sidewalk outside our new place, I realized I had stepped into a chapter one never thought I'd reach: peace without performance. No more orchestrating emotional labor for people who hadn't earned it. No more diminishing myself to amplify someone else's spotlight. No more chasing crumbs of validation like they were precious jewels. I still saw my family often, but now, those interactions were grounded in mutual respect, not silent transactions. Every visit wasn't a test of endurance or a balancing act of polite smiles and internal screams. It was just easier, more genuine. One evening, Sienna came over carrying 2 lattes and a crumpled envelope. "I got my first bonus," she grinned, bouncing slightly on her heels. "It's not much. But I wanted to share it with you." I blinked. She handed me the envelope with a sheepish look. "You don't have to accept it." But I couldn't just keep it all. Inside was a $200 gift card to a home store. "I figured you'd know what to do with it," she added. It wasn't the dollar amount that moved me. It was the gesture. The reversal. The acknowledgement that she had once taken and now felt compelled to give. Later that week, I used the card to buy a full-length mirror, something I'd always wanted, but never let myself purchase during the lean years. I hung it in the hallway, across from the front door. Every time I left the house, I'd catch my reflection, not to check makeup or adjust earrings, but to remind myself of what I'd become: whole, grounded, seen. At work, I was invited to speak at a regional marketing summit. It was a big deal, hundreds of professionals, industry leaders, new graduates looking for guidance. The kind of event where panelists wore tailored suits and the coffee stations never ran out of cream. Standing at the podium that day, I didn't just talk about campaign strategies or market shifts. I spoke about resilience, about invisible labor, about the danger of undervaluing quiet strength. After the talk, a young woman approached me in the hallway. "I saw myself in your story," she said, voice shaky. "I've always felt like the background character in my family. But hearing you made me feel possible." I hugged her, because I knew exactly what she meant. That weekend, James and I hosted a small dinner at our place, just a few friends. Nothing fancy. We served pasta, passed around crusty bread, and laughed until our sides ached. At one point, while clearing dishes, he looked at me and said, "This is it. This is what we were building toward." And he was right. It wasn't wealth or status or picture-perfect reunions that defined success. It was ease, laughter without tension, joy without guilt. That Sunday, I stopped by my parents' place. The house looked a little different: some new curtains, a garden bed out front, a fresh coat of paint on the porch railings. The changes were small, but they reflected stability, independence, effort. Dad was in the backyard fixing a wobbly fence post, a task he hadn't had the strength for during his recovery. Mom was clipping herbs near the patio, her hair tucked under a wide-brimmed sun hat, humming to herself. When they saw me, they lit up, not with relief or expectation, but with warmth. We sat together for hours, sipping lemonade and catching up on nothing urgent. They didn't ask for money. I didn't feel the need to offer, and yet, when I left, Mom pressed a small container of homemade granola into my hands. "For your mornings," she said. For once, I didn't interpret it as repayment. Just care. Sienna arrived later, waving a folder. "I'm designing a website," she announced. "Not just for work, my own portfolio. Can I get your feedback?" Her growth continued to surprise me. She was asking the right questions now. Reading books. Listening more than talking. Saving without being prompted. We sat on the back porch reviewing layout options. She took notes. Asked about SEO. Joked about color palettes clashing with her sensitive artistic soul. It was light. Simple. Normal, but beneath the laughter was something stronger, balance. Years ago, I would have avoided moments like this, afraid of being drawn back into the chaos. But now? I could be present, because I wasn't pouring from an empty vessel anymore. Later that night, James wrapped his arms around me as we stood brushing our teeth, side by side. You're different, he said quietly, watching me through the mirror. How so? You carry yourself like someone who knows she belongs. I smiled, because I finally did. It's strange how, after years of fighting for a seat at the table, you stop needing the chair altogether. I no longer cared about outperforming Sienna, winning praise, or being crowned the responsible one. That identity had worn thin, not because it wasn't true, but because it had always come at the expense of my joy. Now, I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was simply living. Some evenings, I'd sit on the front steps of our duplex, wrapped in a soft cardigan, listening to passing traffic and distant wind chimes. I wasn't waiting for another apology or another revelation. I was simply absorbing the quiet power of balance. One afternoon, Mom called out of the blue, not to ask for help or share news, but just to talk. I've been cleaning the attic, she said, chuckling. Found a stack of your old report cards. I smiled. Let me guess, straight A's? And a note from your second grade teacher that said, Madison finishes her work early, then helps her classmates finish theirs. That line stayed with me, because even back then, I had been pouring into others. Some habits begin long before we realize the toll they'll take. I'm sorry I didn't celebrate you more, Mom added. Even back then. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't timed for dramatic effect. It was quiet. Honest. Something she wouldn't have said a year ago. Thank you, I said simply. We talked for over an hour, about groceries, books, her garden, nothing heavy. And that, in itself, was healing. Later that week, Sienna came by carrying a Tupperware of her famous lemon bars. The ones that always collapsed slightly in the center but tasted like summer. I've been thinking, she said, setting them on the counter, about starting a side project, a line of illustrated journals. Kind of like creative therapy meets daily planning. That's brilliant, I replied. She hesitated, then added, I want you to be part of it. Not to fund it, to consult. Strategically. Like a business partner. It caught me off guard. She wasn't trying to pull me back into a caretaking role. She wasn't fishing for resources. She was inviting me, as an equal. I said yes, not because I owed her, because I wanted to. We spent the next several weekends sketching ideas, brainstorming names, debating fonts. It reminded me of the childhood we almost had, the one where we worked together instead of orbiting different planets. James supported everything with his usual quiet presence. Whether I needed a sounding board or a delivery driver for prototype samples, he was there. Whatever you need, he'd say, brushing flour off his hands as he baked another test batch of scones. But don't forget to rest. The world doesn't need a burned-out Madison again. He was right. I'd learned my limits. I protected my calendar like sacred ground now. No more cramming every hour with deliverables, emotional labor, or self-imposed tasks. I made space, for stillness, for walks, for tea without a laptop beside it. When spring gave way to early summer, my parents invited me and James for dinner, just us four. No crowd. No distractions. They served grilled salmon and roasted vegetables, lit candles, even played soft jazz on the old stereo. After dessert, Dad stood up and surprised me with a small gift bag. Inside was a leather-bound planner with gold-edged pages. On the first page, in his handwriting, to Madison, our compass, our anchor, and our reminder that love must come with respect. I didn't cry. But I smiled until my cheeks hurt, because finally, the girl who gave, had been given something back, not just a journal. A legacy. Some stories end with fireworks. Mine didn't. It ended with quiet dinners, shared glances, and small sentences that carried the weight of entire histories. It ended with my name finally being spoken in the places it used to echo without recognition. It ended with me, not a shadow behind the golden child, not the silent donor in the background, but a woman finally standing in her own light, and honestly, that was more satisfying than any applause ever could have been. My sister's journal line eventually went live, modest but meaningful. A small online storefront, a handful of supportive buyers, and one particularly thoughtful 5-star review from our grandmother who had learned to email just for this. We celebrated with cupcakes and sparkling cider, laughing in a way that felt completely new. Not forced. Not performative. Just present. Sienna included a page in each journal, a quote I had once said without realizing it would stay with her. You don't have to be the loudest voice to carry the most weight, but you do have to speak. That had been my lesson. My cost. My freedom. I visited my parents more often now, not to rescue, not to patch holes, not to pour money into places it would vanish without acknowledgement. I visited because I wanted to. Because I knew that if I spoke, I'd be heard. If I offered something, it wouldn't be taken for granted. We'd become a family again, not the same one. A better version. One built from honesty, consequence, and finally, respect. And James, steady, kind, unshakable, was there through it all. One morning in late June, he handed me a box before we'd even brushed our teeth. Inside was a ring, simple, elegant, exactly right. He didn't kneel or recite a speech. He just whispered, "I want to build everything with you. And this time, we build it around you, not in spite of you." I said yes, not because I was ready to be someone's foundation again, but because I knew I wouldn't have to be the whole structure by myself. We sent out invites for a small ceremony that fall. Not dozens of guests. Just the people who saw me, who finally saw me. Sienna painted the invitations by hand. My father walked me down the aisle with a steady grip and tear-brimmed eyes. My mother adjusted my veil and mouthed, "I'm proud of you," before I stepped forward, and I believed her. I stood there that day, not with resentment hidden beneath mascara or sacrifice woven into my dress hem, but with peace, because I had chosen myself, and through that choice, I taught everyone around me how to choose better. 2. If you're hearing this and wondering whether it's worth speaking up, whether your value is too invisible to be noticed, I want to tell you something. You are not difficult for asking to be treated fairly, you are not selfish for needing your voice heard, and you are not wrong for walking away from people who only see your usefulness, not your humanity. Love, real love, does not fear your boundaries. It respects them, and if you've spent years giving without return, know this: you are not unappreciated because you're unworthy. You are unappreciated because some people have never learned how to see beyond their own needs, but that can change, and sometimes, the very act of saying no more is the beginning of everything new. Today, I live in a home filled with light, laughter, and yes, balance. I still help my family when needed. But now, I do it as an equal, not a ghost. I still work hard, but I no longer sacrifice myself to prove my value. I still love, but now, I include myself in the equation, and every time I pass that mirror in our hallway, the one I bought after my sister handed me that envelope, I see someone I fought to become, not perfect, but whole, and finally, gloriously visible. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt overshadowed, underappreciated, or erased in your own family, I want to hear from you. Share your experience in the comments. Speech balloon direct hit. Don't forget to like this video if it touched you. Bell subscribe for more powerful, real-life stories that reveal the truth behind family, betrayal, and transformation. Outbox stray and share this with someone who needs to hear. You deserve to be seen. Thank you for listening. You are not alone.